Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shiva Sri Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It gets good. It gets really good. It's going to read from the biography of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And his biographer is Satsvarupa Das Goswami. It's written beautifully. It's written so nicely, taking us all through Prabhupada's birth, early family life, marriage, college education, meeting a spiritual master, and then giving everything up. We're getting to that point where he can dedicate himself completely to the mission of the Gaudiya Madhva Sampradaya. Hare Krishna. This is chapter 7, and it's called Jhansi, the League of Devotees. And there's a little quote here just before the chapter. It looks like an ad Prabhupada must have put somewhere. So here's how it reads. Wanted. Candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply. A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees. Bharati Bhawan, Post Office, Jhansi, UP, Uttar Pradesh, looks like UP. Signed, Bhai Charnde. It was another 12-hour ride with dozens of stops. The trains rattling and clattering, and its rocking from side to side made riding difficult for a Bhai crowded on the wooden bench with other third-class passengers. He kept writing. And close the door. This is street traffic. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Within the dingy compartment, passengers eyed one another complacently, and soot and dust blew in the open windows as the train sped along. Outside, past the monotonous embankment of loose stones, bright violet trumpet flowers bloomed on tall stalks in the shallow trackside ditches. Water buffalo and oxen grazed in the distance or sometimes pulled a plow before a solitary farmer. Abai was going to Jhansi, not for business, but for preaching. 1 month before, in October of 1952, when Abai had visited Jhansi on business, Mr. Dubé, a customer of the owner of a Jhansi hospital, Mr. Dubé, a customer and owner of a Jhansi hospital, had invited him to lecture at the Gita Mandir. Many Jhansi people appreciated things religious or humanitarian, whether from Vaishnavas, Theosophists, Mayavadis, politicians, or whatever. They regarded almost any path as dharma, as long as it showed some edifying piety or tended toward public welfare. Mr. Dubé had read with interest the several issues of Back to Godhead and had therefore requested Abai to speak. Abai had been eager, and he had found keen interest amongst the audience of more than 100 people, many of them young medical students and graduates from the local Ayurvedic college. Abai was 56, and his commanding presentation of Krishna consciousness had impressed the young religious-minded people of Jhansi. 25-year-old Prabhakar Mishra, principal of the Vedanta Sanskrit College and head medical officer of the Jhansi Ayurvedic University, saw that Abai was very forceful in his desire to spread Krishna consciousness. Dr. Mishra regarded him as a kind of guru, although dressed in white. Quote, "Here is a humble person," he thought, "a real sadhu." Short and stocky, Dr. Shastri, just beginning his career in Ayurvedic medicine, was an active young man, fascinated by Abai's purity and his vision of a world movement for distributing India's culture. Older men, like tall, suave Ramachandran, wore a white Nehru cap, also wanted to learn more about Lord Chaitanya from Abai. Dr. Mullik, who was the Gita Mandir secretary, and Dr. Sidhi from the university, along with their wives, had sincerely approached Abai after his talk and asked him to please visit Jhansi again. Abai had come to them not as a pharmaceutical salesman or a man with family concerns, but purely as a devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Although the specific applications of Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati were new to his audience, these teachings had interested them, and the more Abai had expressed these teachings and spoken of his ambition for spreading Krishna's message, the more his hearers had encouraged him. Several of them had suggested he conduct his mission in Jhansi, and they'd promised to help him. Dr. Shastri had even invited Abai to come live with him. He would introduce Abai to important citizens and arrange for lectures in the various meeting places at Jhansi. After staying for 10 days, Abai had returned to Allahabad, but remembering Jhansi, he had been unable to concentrate on his business. something more important was on his mind: the need for an association of devotees propagating the teachings and practices of Krishna consciousness worldwide. With the Gaudiya Math now broken into permanent schisms, his godbrothers conducting their own private ashrams in separate locales, apparently impervious to any reconciliations, something would have to be done if the overwhelming atmosphere of godlessness were to be corrected. There must emerge, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had envisioned, a league of preachers with activities worldwide. The nations of the world had sought unity through the League of Nations, and recently through the United Nations. The League had failed, and so would the United Nations, unless it recognized the true spiritual unity and equality of all living beings in terms of their intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abai did not expect any good to come of such organizations. Though they wanted peace and unity, their attempts were simply another feature of godlessness. No, creating peace and unity was the duty of Vaishnavas. So Abai had been thinking that perhaps a likely place to start an organization of devotees would be Jhansi. It wasn't a major city, but at least he had found concerned people. The students had listened, and accepted, and had said they would help. Abai had sensed a certain lack of sincerity and depth in their appreciation, and a sentimentality that made him doubt their seriousness, but if he could find a few, or even one, who was serious, then he would have a beginning. He wanted to preach. That was his mission. Besides, he was already getting older. If something were to begin, it should be now. So he would go to Jhansi again to stay for an indefinite duration. Without much concern for his Allahabad affairs, Abai left his pharmaceutical business with his sons and nephew, informing them that he was going to Jhansi. As the train pulled into the station, Abai saw Dr. Shastri waving energetically. They rode together by Tanga. Tanga's a horse-drawn, little carriage, horse-drawn. They rode together by Tanga to Dr. Shastri's dispensary, and the talkative, effusive doctor promised many preaching opportunities and interviews. Dr. Shastri also spoke of the lore of Jhansi. So this is a little history, the folklore of Jhansi. The site of the present city had formerly been a part of the forest in which Lord Ramachandra had practiced austerities many thousands of years ago. The Pandavas had lived here during their exile, and since then many great Vedic sages had their hermitages in the area. Jhansi had also been the home of an Indian heroine, Lakshmi Bai, who in the mid-19th century had taken part in starting the Indian independence movement against the British regime. Statues and pictures of Lakshmi Bai riding a horse, holding a sword in her upraised hand, were displayed throughout the town. But the Jhansi of 1952 was a crowded, poor city with dirty streets and minimal technological amenities. Dr. Shastri lived alone in a 2-story rented building in Jhansi's Zupri Bazaar. On the first floor he had his clinic, and upstairs his one-room residence, which he had offered to share with Abai. The young but influential doctor was a good person to introduce Abai to receptive citizens of Jhansi, and he was eager to do so. Outgoing and energetic, he moved easily amongst the people of his town. He was respectful towards Abai, who was twice his age, and whom he appreciated as being firmly fixed in Vaishnava philosophy and the way of life. Dr. Shastri saw it as his duty to help Abai, and he gladly introduced Abai to others and arranged for lectures. Abai and Dr. Shastri would cook and eat together like family members. Abai revealed his idea for a League of Devotees, an organization with worldwide scope, but based in Jhansi. The citizens of Jhansi, he said, should all take part in helping spread Lord Krishna's mission. Lord Chaitanya had said that Indians have a special responsibility to distribute God consciousness, both in India and around the world. Now, this is a quote from Dr. Shastri, that was evidently interviewed. He says, in his heart, always it was burning that the whole world was suffering in the materialistic view. Everyone is busy to eat, drink, and be merry. The whole day he was touring and preaching his mission that was prescribed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj. He was having iron will determination and self-confidence about his mission. He was not doubtful at all. He was Dhridavrata, staunchly determined. Actually, he was always preaching, Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nasteva, 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 Gatir Anyata. No other way except Hare Krishna mantra. So, always discussing, sometimes the whole night, he was discussing with me. And sometimes I was fed up. I was requesting, please don't disturb me. Please let me sleep. And he, the old man missionary worker, he was just like a young man. I was a young chap, and he was just like my friend, my elder brother. He was like my guide and teacher, because the preacher is a friend, philosopher, and guide. He was always trying to create a good atmosphere through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. The whole Bhagavad Gita was his practical life. His mission was not a mission of preaching only, but of practical action. He was also trying to catch me for this mission, and I would try to slip away. I did not think that he would do any miracle for spiritual revolution of the world, although that is what he urged us. While Dr. Shastri tended his clinic, Abai sat and spoke with patients, occasionally recommending medicines, but mostly preaching. For now, he was content to live and preach in Jhansi. Here was life. People receptive to his preaching, who responded to his urging them to chant Hare Krishna. His desire and determination to leave everything else behind and preach day and night, depending on Krishna for the result, were increasing. He began regularly lecturing and chanting at various programs in the city, sometimes at several in one day. On Sundays, he would lecture at the Sadhana Mandir, another day at the Gita Mandir, another day at the Theosophical Society, and regularly in people's homes. Mr. Ram Mitra, the shopkeeper poet, maintained a Shiva temple near his home, and Abai began to perform kirtan and lecture there. Sometimes Mr. Mitra would speak in Hindi on Bhagavad Gita at the Sadhana Mandir, and Abai would attend. Sometimes Abai would visit Mr. Mitra at his utensils shop. The shop was in a crowded Jhansi bazaar and opened onto the busy street. Abai would sit down like an ordinary customer amid stacks of stainless steel buckets, plates, bowls, and lotas, and speak to Mr. Mitra and friends about Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or sometimes he would listen to Mr. Mitra tell about his published book of poetry and his literary reputation. Mr. Mitra saw that Abai's ambition was no less than to make the whole city of Jhansi alive with Krishna consciousness. Abai quoted Chaitanya Charitamrita. One who has received the great fortune of taking birth in India should make his life perfect and then do good for others by spreading Krishna consciousness. And, Abai would add, the whole world is waiting. The whole world is waiting, Mr. Mitra, for our spiritual revolution. Mr. Mitra would nod, his handsome Nehru-like face forming a smile. But he saw that Abai wanted to do more than merely listen to him. He wanted them to do something. Once, Mr. Mitra offered Abai a copy of his book, showing him the foreword by a famous man, and repeatedly mentioned the great sadhu Vinod Bhave had liked the poems very much. When Mr. Mitra learned that Abai was a regular milk drinker, he began offering Abai fresh milk daily from his cow, a black cow. And black cows, Mr. Mitra said, gave especially good milk. Abai invited Mr. Mitra to accompany him on foot to nearby villages, along with a kirtan party for preaching. But Mr. Mitra declined, being unable to get anyone to tend his shop for him. Another young Ayurvedic doctor was Dr. Siddhi, who immediately expressed interest in Abai's enthusiastic plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. This is a little quote from Dr. Siddhi. He says, "He came several times to my place. I've got a kirtan room on my roof, and he performed kirtan there as well as at the Gita Mandir. We were also going daily to the Theosophical Society. There was an atmosphere, a very pious, sacred, and calm atmosphere when the kirtan and preaching and lectures were performed. He used to play harmonium. We accompanied him for meeting people and preaching his mission. The main thing was to perform kirtan and give a lecture on Bhagavad Gita and the life of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was his Lord, and I also loved him." So he was, the him is capitalized, so I also loved him, Chaitanya. Radhilal Malik, secretary of the Gita Mandir and Sadhana Mandir, began meeting often with Abai. This is a quote from Radhilal Malik. "I was very much influenced by him. I used to spend 3 or 4 hours every morning in his association. He had many, many big scriptures. He was mainly concerned about the books about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was also writing at that time. The president of the Gita Mandir and I both volunteered to cook for him. It was during a morning walk with Radhilal Malik that Abai first spotted the Bharati Bhavan, a picturesque temple complex across from the large Antia Pond. The neighborhood known as Antia Tal was quiet and sparsely populated, but it was near Sipri Road, the main thoroughfare between downtown Jhansi and Sipri Bazaar. Abai inquired from Mr. Mullik about this temple, and together they turned from the main road and walked down a sloping footpath that led through the main gates of the compound. There they found several secluded acres, nestled within a grove of neem and mango trees. The main structure was the Radha Memorial. It was small, like a chapel, but its proportions were stout and bold. Sitting on an octagonal stone base, it rose on 8 ornate pillars of red and white chipped marble, to a stone dome on top. 2 elephants, bearing the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, on their upraised trunks, decorated the entrance. Concrete bunting and striped patterns of red, green, and blue added to the decorative yet massive effect. The entrance was marked with the words Radha Smarak, carved in Hindi script, and above it the English translation, Radha Memorial. When Abai saw the Sanskrit inscription across the side of the stone temple, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. When Abai saw the Sanskrit inscription across the side of the stone temple, Hari Ram, Ram Ram, Hari Hari, he turned to Radhalal Malik and said strongly, "The Lord has built this building for my use. From that moment, Abai was determined to have the building. Mr. Mullock explained that the temple had been built in 1939 as a memorial to the wealthy Vaishnav landowner Radhabai, but at the present was not in use. Dr. Prabhakar Mishra, whom Abai had already met on several occasions, was occupying some of the rooms, but otherwise it was deserted. Mr. Mullock and Abai sought Dr. Mishra in his quarters in the main building, and when Dr. Mishra saw Abai's enthusiasm, he invited Abai to stay there with him. Dr. Mishra confirmed that, except for his Sunday morning Gita class, the facility was sitting idle, and he welcomed Abai to carry on his writing and preaching there. Abai liked the idea. Immediately he began thinking of uses for the buildings, surveying the land with increased interest. A second, larger building, also with stone pillars and facades, held a hall and 5 rooms. Abai made mental plans for each room. In this room, kirtans and lectures with large gatherings. In this room, the deity of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In these rooms, resident brahmacharis and sannyasis, guests here, an office there, the printing press here. There was even land for grazing a cow. It was a self-contained unit. Hundreds of people could come here for kirtan, prasadam, and discourses. Preachers could go out from here distributing Back to Godhead magazine. Some could even go abroad with Lord Chaitanya's message. As Abai and his companions walked through the compound, appreciating it as a suitable place to start an ashram, his companions encouraged him, saying that they were sure that Mr. Reva Sankar Bayal, the agent who handled all the properties of Radhabai's descendants, would have no objection to Abai's living there. Why couldn't the landlord give him the buildings? Abai asked. They were simply going to waste. If it were actually to be a memorial to Radha, it should be used in Krishna's service, since Krishna is Radha's worshipful Lord. Abai was determined, and his friends agreed to help him. First, they met with Ram Mitra, who said that he was such a close friend of Mr. Biles that Mr. Biles would probably give the place simply at his request. Dr. Shastri said that he also wanted to go to impress upon Mr. Bayal how much the people of Jhansi wanted Abai to have this place. When Reva Shankar Bayal met with his friend Ram Mitra, also present were Abai, Dr. Shastri, Radhalal Malik, Prabhakar Mishra, and Suryamukha Sharma, a young, educated Jhansi woman. They presented the case from several angles, and Mr. Bayal listened. He agreed that he wasn't using the place at present, and this seemed to be a good cause. He agreed to let Abai use the facilities for his League of Devotees as long as he liked. And at Abai's request, he agreed to become a member of the League. They shook hands, and on behalf of the estate, Mr. Bayal presented the Bharati Bhavan properties in charity to Abai Charan Day and the League of Devotees. Krishna. Krishna. I know how this ends, so Hare Krishna. Krishna didn't want it. Krishna. Okay, more with the League of Devotees. During December and January, Abai prepared a League of Devotees charter. He wanted to begin vigorous, extensive preaching, following the example of his spiritual master. Otherwise, he began to set his goals to paper. The project immediately began to expand beyond Jhansi, beyond India. Of course, the League of Devotees was for the young people of Jhansi. They were already expressing their interest, but Abai's charter described more than merely evening classes and kirtan. It was a broad scheme, including a description of the 4 orders of society, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, and detailing plans to accommodate a worldwide religious movement. The charter set forth a probationary period for prospective members. It described spiritual initiation. It arranged for economic reciprocation between individual members and the League. It arranged to provide lodgings for preachers, and it defined prohibited activities. Quote, illegitimate connection with women, intoxicating habits, diets other than regulated strictly on vegetable kingdom, gambling, and unnecessary sporting or recreation enterprises. Hare Krishna. To establish his league with the registrar in Lucknow, Abai required a memorandum of association signed by the league members. In this document, which was to list the objectives of the society, Abai expressed his vision for the continuation of his spiritual master's vision. Like his godbrothers who had created new mats after the dissolution of the Gaudiya Mat, Abai was forming a new branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya to be called the League of Devotees. He was not simply claiming proprietorship of a few buildings. He was establishing a Krishna-conscious society that would expand into a worldwide movement. His intentions were clearly not insular, but were directed towards creating centers for spiritual development all over the world. Abai wrote, quote, Lord Chaitanya revealed the transcendental process of approaching the Absolute Godhead, and in his teachings, nothing appears to be absurd from the point of human reasoning, and nothing against any religion as accepted by the human and civilized world. I don't understand that sentence. Its wording is a little unusual. So he revealed his transcendental process of approaching the Absolute Godhead. Lord Chaitanya revealed his process of approaching, Lord Chaitanya's process. In his teaching, nothing seems to be absurd from the point of human reasoning, and nothing against any religion as accepted by the human and civilized world. Describing very liberal approach to a very liberal. Hare Krishna. In enumerating the League's goals, he included the opening of centers in all parts of the world, thus establishing the League as an international organization for spiritual developments through education, culture, as also by recruiting members from all nations, creeds, and castes. The League would publish literature in many languages and print a monthly magazine, Back to Godhead. Abai obtained the necessary signatures for his memorandum of association. He then took the train to Lucknow, and on February 4th, paid the deposit of 50 rupees and filed his application. He returned to Jhansi. Hare Krishna. Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Krishna, Krishna. Hare Krishna. Jai Sri Prabhupada. Krishna.